Swashbucklers, you're listening to Under the Crossbones, episode number 138. My name's Phil Johnson. I'm your host for the show each and every week. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for telling your friends. Thank you for donating, visiting sponsors, all that kind of good stuff that you do that helps me keep the old boat afloat. Much appreciated. So here we are, episode number 138. Fun fact about the number 138. There's a Misfits song by a band called The Misfits. There's a song called We Are 138 that is very vague, and the band has never fully explained what exactly the song is about. But if you go Google We Are 138, you will go down a giant rabbit hole of fan explanations that I'm not even going to go into here because many of them are crazy. And it's a long rabbit hole, a long, deep, dark rabbit hole. So if you have an hour or two to kill and you want to go do that, go Google We Are 138. I don't even think you need to put Misfits in the search. It'll just come up, but you can put it in there to make sure that you gather all the craziness just in one place. So, fun show for you today. My guest today is Cheryl Jones, and she has a podcast called Movies Made Me, but that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is the British Navy, because that is her expertise, and we'll find out why that's her expertise and how she got there, and it's kind of a crazy story. So lots of pirate talk, lots of British Navy talk, lots of life experience type of talk today that I think you're really going to dig. And Cheryl, like I said, has a podcast called Movies Made Me that I just now got back from Los Angeles. I just walked into my office. I got home, took a shower real quick, get some of that road washed off, and hopped right on the mic to talk to you before I have to run out of here and go give a half dozen guitar lessons tonight. So it's one of those days. But it was a great trip to Los Angeles. It was fantastic. Spent some time with Cheryl at her friend's place doing her podcast. And that episode of her podcast will be out in like September, I think. I'll let you know when it's out. I talked about a bunch of stuff that I've never talked about on other podcasts, so that's going to be a lot of fun. Here's a peek into the podcast world and how it all comes about. Now, I'll tell you, as we get into the interview, Cheryl and I will explain how she and I got connected. But anyway, I was on Jackie Cation's podcast called The Dork Forest a while back. And more recently, Cheryl was also on Jackie Cation's podcast, but had listened to my episode of that podcast first, and there was a similar thematic connection between us. So we got in contact, and then Cheryl came onto my podcast, which you're going to hear in a few moments, and then I just went and did her podcast, which you'll hear in September, and her friend's apartment that we were recording at in Los Angeles, her friend was in the next room recording his podcast. So if it sounds like 95% of the world population has a podcast, I can see how you would think that. But if you don't have a podcast yet? Why don't you have a podcast yet, man? But anyway, it was very, very fun. And Cheryl's podcast is a whole bunch of fun. So that'll be coming up in September. But you're going to hear my version of her story today. And that was good. I spent some time with Talderoy. If you've been hanging out in the pirate community, especially the West Coast pirate community, for any amount of time, then you at least know of Talderoy. He is a pirate. He's one of the people running the Long Beach Pirate Invasion coming up at the end of June. And he runs a very successful tattoo shop in Hollywood called Studio City Tattoo that is fully decked out in pirate theming. And so I went over to his tattoo shop to say hey, talk with him about the festival a bit. I will be appearing at the festival on stage behind a mic doing some things which are kind of up in the air right now, but I will be there. You will see me behind a microphone. I will also be doing a ton of interviews while I'm there because they're doing the inductions for this year's Order of the Leviathan. All sorts of great stuff happening. If you can come out to Long Beach June 30th and July 1st, it's going to be a party, man. It is going to be a lot of fun. And you can come say hey to me and a bunch of cool pirates from the scene, and it's going to be a good time. So I spent some time with Talderoy. He is a very nice guy. In our discussion and just hearing him discuss things with his clients that were coming in, very upfront, nice dude. Like that guy a whole bunch. So I'm looking forward to working with him on more stuff. And then I did gigs while I was down there, and all 3 for 3. I went 3 for 3 good sets across the weekend. Not always the case. Los Angeles can be a very difficult market for comedians because here's the thing. You know how sometimes you feel like there is too much media to consume, right? Your Netflix queue is never ending. The podcast queue just grows daily. At least mine does. I knocked out about 13, 14 episodes on the drive to LA and back, and there's still so many more sitting there. I'm always a month behind on my podcast listening. But there's movies and there's music. Like, you never get to the same album twice because there's so many new things to listen to, so many new movies to watch, so many new things to consume. Well, in Los Angeles, there's all that, plus all the unfinished stuff that nobody else has seen yet, because that's where so much of it is made. And so the problem is double or triple in Los Angeles of there being so much media to consume, because a lot of it is stuff that has not reached the mainstream audience yet. And so because of that, it just triples the expectations and the competition and all that kind of stuff. So 2 of the 3 shows I was doing over the weekend were rooms that I have not done well in previously. The one in Ventura at the Ventura Harbor Comedy Club, I had only been there once before, and it was for a competition. And the audience that night was a Wednesday or a Thursday or a Monday or something like that. And the audience was a very vanilla mainstream kind of crowd, and anything remotely edgy did not fly with them. And so my set that night was terrible, very bummy, very, very bummy. And so this time going in, I was like, all right, I'm gonna do my vanilla stuff. I'm gonna do my vanilla mainstream stuff, which is it was fine. If you can kill with that, then great. If that's what the audience wants, there's always 2 ways you come at an audience. You go, I'm gonna give this audience exactly what they want tonight, and I may not be completely artistically satisfied by that, but I will give this audience exactly what they're looking for. Or I want to push this audience right to their line, find out where their line is, and maybe just go a little bit across it. Because that's where the real fun is in any comedy show. It's when you blow well past that line that the audience starts to revolt on you. And I've been known to blow well past that line from time to time. And so I was not in the mood to make this audience mad at me. I'm trying to get in with the club, that kind of thing. So I had planned to do a very vanilla mainstream set. And there was Willie Barcena was the headliner. Very funny guy, been around a long time. And he had a couple of guys opening for him. And so we had, there were 3 or 4 of us doing 10-minute sets up at the front. And then Willie did his headlining set. And as soon as the MC went up, the place was packed. It was nearly sold out. And it was not a small, scared weeknight audience. It was a large, ethnically mixed, near sold out Friday night audience. And the MC went up and did not do a vanilla mainstream set. And the audience was into it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just do what I do and do my thing. And it was fantastic. So good. And I got one of the nicest compliments from one of the other comedians after. He said, do you maintain that level of energy for your entire hour show? Because apparently I had some energy going. And I did, because that's what a good audience does to the comedian. And I do try to keep that energy up for a whole hour. Some nights it works, some nights it doesn't. But it was nice of him to say that. So, conquered show number 1. Show number 2 was at Flappers in Burbank. Great club. When I play their main room, I always do great. Never had a bad set in their main room. In their smaller room, what they call the Yoo-Hoo room, smaller room seats about 40, maybe. It's a cool little room. It's got some very, very dead acoustics, which can be tricky. It's very, there's not a lot of reverb in the room. A little bit of reverb helps the laughs carry, helps the jokes carry. This is a very, very dead sounding room, and they did it that way on purpose. It just didn't suit my particular taste. And so I've always had trouble in that room for whatever reason. And my brother came to that show. And usually when my brother comes to a show when I'm down in LA, it's a terrible show for whatever reason. Either the other comics stink, or I have a bad set, or it's a weird random venue of some sort. So this one went really well. I was very happy with the set. My brother finally saw a good show. And he even said so. He's usually, when I come, the show's not that good. But so he had a good time. Everybody had a good time. I went 2 for 2. And then Sunday night at the Ice House in Pasadena, which is a venue I had trouble with early on. And then I figured out how to work that particular room. And I've had many good sets there since. And so I wasn't too worried about that one. It was opening for a hypnotist. Jimmy Burns was the MC, cool old school guy. One of my favorite green rooms in the country, just because of the people that you run into in that green room. Comedy green rooms are one of the funny best, coolest places in the world. If you and it's a place that not everybody gets to go to, and so I'm always very proud and honored to get to go into the green room, talk to the dudes and the ladies who make the funny, because I get to be there. It's fun. So that show went great. Hypnotism show. Those are always fun. It was great. So I went 3 for 3 on the sets this weekend. And it's always nice. Like I said, in LA, there's so much going on that if you're the cream that rises a little bit on any particular little thing, it's very gratifying because you go, okay, I'm doing something right because I made this audience react in a positive way. They sometimes react in not a positive way. But anyway, that was great. Shows were good. Tal DeRoy was great. The podcast was great. Spent some time with my brother and his wife and my niece, Charlotte, who is 2. And I get to do the uncle thing, which is spend some time with the niece. And then as soon as she starts screaming, I can be like, yeah, so I got a thing. I have to go now. She can be all right when she's older, but 2-year-olds, oof, man. So anyway, there's lots more coming up this week. Go hit the underthecrossbones.com, click the tour dates button. I got a crazy amount of shows coming up. I got 8 shows in the next 2 weeks. May 1st, which is today, if you're listening to this today, if you're like me, you're listening to it a month from now, and you've completely missed this. But May 1st, I will be headlining at Sally Tomatoes. That's in Rohnert Park, California. May the 3rd, Blue Lagoon, Santa Cruz, California. It's the 11th anniversary show of the Blue Lagoonies Comedy Show. May 4th, Friday, I'll be at the All Out Comedy Theater in Oakland, California. May the 5th, Lake of the Pines, Auburn, California, headlining that one. May the 9th, the Milk Bar in San Francisco, California. That is an all-musical comedy show. So it's all music and funny. It should be a fun show. May the 11th, Friday, I'll be at Comedy Oakland, California. And May the 12th, I'll be at Critical Hit at a game store called It's Your Move in Oakland, California. That's a really fun show. So all that, if like I said, go to underthecrossbones.com, click on the tour dates button. You can see when I'm coming near you. Michigan is coming up, possibly Chicago, Chattanooga, a bunch of Oregon, Washington dates. Those are all on the calendar. So I'll be near you soon, and so you can check those out. We are sponsored today by TeePublic. TeePublic is a t-shirt company that works with independent artists with their art, and they bring it to you. And I tell you about it, and everybody gets paid, and you get cool shirts. It's a really cool thing. I've curated over 100 super awesome pirate t-shirts for you. Funny ones, scary ones, sexy ones. There's all sorts of them out there. And I put together a cool collection of over 100 really awesome pirate shirts for you to check out and get for yourself. And the way you go check those out, go to underthecrossbones.com/shirt. And when you buy shirts, you help support the show and you help support independent t-shirt artists. And that is a great thing to do. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at underthecrossbones.com/138. And if you want to help support the show in other ways, very easy. Go to underthecrossbones.com/support. Drop a donation in the PayPal box, whatever you'd like. Click the Amazon banner. Buy yourself something nice. Amazon kicks me back a few pennies, and that's helpful. Or if you want to be a sponsor of the show, we can make that happen. Cheap and easy. Go to underthecrossbones.com/support. All right, man, I feel like I had too much caffeine on the way home. Like there's a Rockstar energy drink in my system, and I feel a little bit amped, a little bit sleep deprived because that also happened all weekend. And I have to go teach a half dozen guitar lessons tonight, and then come home and crash pretty hard. So let's get into the interview. This is Cheryl Jones again from Movies Made Me podcast, but we're going to be talking about the British Navy today and how she got there. This is a really interesting story. She's a very interesting lady, and I know you're going to enjoy this talk. So here we go. This is Cheryl Jones. Enjoy. So I discovered you through Jackie Cation's podcast, The Dork Forest,
Yes.
which I was like, oh, British maritime history. I'll have to listen to that one. And then within the first 5 minutes, not only was I mentioned, but I was corrected. And I was
I
like,
apologize, really.
no, not at all. I am such an attention whore that I was very excited.
Well, because I was prepping to be on her show, and I thought, well, I better listen to a few episodes and just make sure I've got the feel of it.
Sure.
And I saw your episode. I was like, well, of course I'm going to listen to one about pirate history. I mean, come on. So, that's how it happened.
So if you remember, what were the four points that you corrected me on? Because you were valid on all of them.
I had it on a Post-it. See, I have my cheat sheet here, but I had it on a separate Post-it note. I know there was one about women not being aboard ships
Right.
in the era, which is everybody says that, and that's been in a million books that there were no women on, but that's not true. There are other books that straighten that out because, especially on like the naval ships, there were women who taught the young midshipmen. They'd be like the wife of one of the petty officers or the captain's wife or whoever, and they would teach the young midshipmen, just as like school teachers, and they would help out in times of battle, like being like powder monkeys, basically,
Okay.
running the powder charges up to the guns. And help out with the surgeon, things like that. So there definitely were women on board. Pirate ships, it was, of course, less common, but we all know of two, of course. But
Sure. So were they more like a den mother type of thing?
Yeah. It was more like the this petty officer got permission to bring his wife along with him, and while she's there, she may as well be doing things,
Okay.
right? So, because she couldn't just sit around. So if there was a need, then she was there and would fill it. So
do you think that was more prominent on military ships, and maybe obviously not on pirate ships, but what about, say, merchant marines and things like that?
I think it was common on merchant vessels as well. I haven't seen as much written about that, but I think it was kind of equivalent between, in fact, probably more common on merchant vessels, I would think, because in the Navy, they had to get permission to bring a wife along, but I think it would have been easier to get that permission on a merchant ship.
Okay.
So, because then it wasn't quite as big a process.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The bureaucracy and all that.
That makes sense. So, so let's kind of jump in here. So your focus, your thing is British maritime history, mostly the military part of it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's for me, it's the social history within the Royal Navy of the late 18th century.
Okay.
So it gets once you go, because as I'm sure we'll discuss, I did a master's degree in this. So once you start studying for your master's and have to write a dissertation, you get very narrow in your focus.
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm like, yeah, everything else, don't care. So basically once sails are out of fashion, I couldn't care less.
Okay.
So
Yeah. I'm similar with jazz. Like once I get past World War II, I'm not that interested. But
yeah, sure. Yeah.
There was no 1800s jazz, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd probably been into that too. So let's back up in your story a little bit here, and let's go pre-master's degree.
Okay.
And how do you get interested in British military maritime history?
Yes, because that's a good story. It's probably the best story I have, actually. So on July 9th, 2003, a movie came out, which I'm sure your listeners have all seen. It was called Pirates of the Caribbean,
Sure.
The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Yeah.
So being a Disney person, I was working for Disney at the time. I thought, okay, I've got to go see this. I like Johnny Depp. Why not? But it's just going to suck. I mean, how can you turn that ride into a movie and have it be any good? But you got to go, right? So we went to downtown Disney, to the AMC there. We went to see it. A friend of mine and my parents went as well. And I walked out of it just going, oh my God, I'm in love with that. I fell in love with Barbossa in that movie. And, it wasn't Johnny Depp for me. It was all Jeffrey Rush. And so I just thought, I want to read about these guys. I had zero interest in anything maritime prior to that movie. And after it, I was like, okay, I want to learn what's real. Like, I know the movie's pretty fake,
Sure.
but was there anything in it that has a hint of authenticity to it? And so the first book I picked up was David Cordingley's Under the Black Flag, which I've since recommended to everyone.
Sure.
Yeah. And everything he's written is great. So I read that, and then that just sent me off on a journey because I loved that book so much. And then I read every pirate book I could get my hands on until it all just became a repetition.
Okay.
Because at a certain point you've read it all, basically.
Yeah. So let me back up for 1 second. What were you doing for Disney at the time?
I was working a really terrible guest service role. They have a credit card program and a gift card program.
Okay.
So I was telephone guest service for those. Like, people with the credit card would go through the bank that ran the credit card, and then if there was a Disney issue, they'd come to us. And and the gift card, we dealt with everything that had to do with that. So and I did that for I left 2 months shy of my 10th anniversary.
That is a long time to do a job like that.
It is, especially when you didn't intend to be in it that long. So I'm like, okay, I can get into Disney with this department. That's great. And then I hear it's really easy to transfer. So I'll do this. I don't really like it, but I'll do it for 6 months, a year, and then I'll transfer. And then, it's not easy. So I never could find any place to transfer to. There weren't any opportunities. So I ended up just stuck there.
What would you have wanted to transfer to?
I don't know, anything. I had friends in the public relations department, which I temped in for a while. I would have liked to have gone over there. Any kind of thing, something that I would have really liked, something that let me be in the park some of the time,
Sure.
So, because who doesn't want to be in the theme parks? Come on.
Right. Absolutely. So you see the film.
Yes.
You get interested in pirates. You read the David Cordingly book, and then you read everything else that's out there. And you're right. It does start to get fairly repetitious after a while.
Right. Once you read a general history of pirates, that sort of core book, then you realize, everybody else is just repeating that.
Well, now you get to read everybody that disagrees with it too, which is the other side of that one.
Yeah.
So then where do you go from there? Most people would stop there and move on to a new hobby, but you did not.
Yes, normal people would stop there. I got a little obsessive, I think. So then I decided, well, okay, I've got about as much as I can get about pirates. What about their ships? So I started reading about ships and learning about that. And then I thought, well, okay, we've got all this coastline here in California. There must be a tall ship somewhere I could go on. I know I went on one as a kid once. So I looked up, just kind of did some web searches and discovered that the Lady Washington was in town on her annual voyage that she takes down from Washington State in the wintertime. And she was the ship that portrayed HMS Interceptor in Pirates of the Caribbean, the movie the ship that they steal.
Sure.
In the movie. So I thought, well, heck yeah, I'm going to go down and check that out. So I did. And I fell in love with the vessel and the people on it, and started doing some photography of them, which they really liked. And then decided, okay, they have this opportunity. You can pay them some money to cover your room and board, basically. And you can go aboard for 2 weeks and sail with them and, work as crew. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. But first I'm going to prep, because that's who I am. And so I started sailing with the LA Maritime Institute. They have twin brigantines, the Exie Johnson and Irving Johnson. And you can go out and volunteer with them and learn how to sail for free, basically. And then they take inner city school kids out on sort of character building sails. So you can volunteer to help with those. Okay. And I did that for just a little bit. Mostly I did it selfishly just so I could learn. And I'll be honest. And then, when the time came, it was February of 2005. I did go out on the Lady Washington. I ended up only staying a week because I discovered I don't really like sailing that much.
There you go. Okay.
So, and it was I felt very isolated, like you're stuck in a port. You don't have a car to get anywhere.
Sure.
And I missed kind of the creature comforts, and it's just, it's cold, it's damp, whatever.
It sounds like when I spent a week and a half in Edmonton, Canada last year.
It probably was very similar. Yeah. The same kind of feeling like, oh, I've got to get out of here. But, I enjoyed doing the work on board. So, I climbed the rigging and worked with the sails up, aloft, and throwing the bow lines and stuff, and generally looking cool. But what I liked the best was when we would be docked and we would give dockside tours, and the full-time crew didn't like to do that. So I would just tell them, hey, you stay down in the hold and I'll take your shift, which they loved. And I would talk to people about the brig, which is the type of vessel that the lady is. She's a brig. And and I would tell them about Pirates of the Caribbean. Like one time there was a woman on with her teenage daughter, and her daughter could not have been less interested in being on this boat, And so I said, well, this is from Pirates, and Johnny Depp and Orlando Bloom both. And then she was like, oh yeah. So she was into it.
Just got to press the right buttons.
That's right. So I really liked that part, though, getting to share it. And that's kind of when I started to realize, okay, I belong here as a photographer. I belong here as a historian of some variety. I don't belong here as a full-time sailor, because it's just, I don't get that thrill out of that everybody else seems to be getting.
Sure. Yeah. I never did much of that myself either, because I have two great fears, large bodies of water and heights. So yeah, not for me.
Well, I have a fear, and we'll get to this later, of course, but I have a podcast that's about the movies that influenced you to be who you are. So Pirates obviously is one of my big ones. The other really big one that helped me come up with the idea for the show was Jaws. Because I saw it when it came out and I was 7, and it was deeply disturbing, terrifying. And I'm 49 now, and I still have that fear. And so when I was on the Lady, when we were docked in Oxnard, and at one point we were just doing maintenance on the vessel, and so I had a rock climbing harness that you use when you go aloft, but they're like, okay, put on your harness, and then we're going to go and paint the bow of the boat. So okay, so I had to hook on and then hang over the bow over the water to paint. And there was another person out there doing it too, but I was really hesitant to like step off the head of the ship and hang out over the bow. And they're like, no, trust your harness. You're not going to fall in. It's cool. And I couldn't tell them that's not what I was afraid of. I was afraid Jaws was going to come up out of the water and eat me like an hors d'oeuvre. Right. I couldn't tell them. Like, I'm embarrassed, but this is what it is.
You're like, there's a soundtrack in my head right now and it's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I know this makes no logical sense, but it's here. Okay.
So interesting. So I can totally identify. Yeah, you didn't quite connect with the actual process of being a sailor, but the photography, the touring type of thing, that totally makes sense. So where did you go from there?
From there, I kept reading like every day on my lunch break. I'd go outside and I'd read whatever history book I was on to then, and it developed from the ships into the Royal Navy, because that seems to be the next logical step, I guess. I don't know. Because where do you go from pirates, right? So
the other side.
Right. So I started learning a lot about the Royal Navy. And then at a certain point, I'd read something like 60 books. And I just thought, okay, look, it's time to go pro with this, or as I sometimes say, to go pro nerd. And, and so I thought, well, I want to, and I hate this job I'm doing. So why don't I go back to school? So I started looking around for programs, and it took me a while to really kind of to find a program that covered what I wanted, which was the Age of Sail, because a lot of programs had gone to 20th century maritime history, which again, I couldn't care less about. So, so I finally found a program at the University of Exeter in England, and applied as a mature student. I was in my 40s, and they accepted me. And so I was like, all right. So I took out some student loans that I now sit under for the rest of my life, but still worth it. And I quit my job and moved to Exeter for a year. And, I was 44 when I went over there, 45 when I finished, because that's the nice thing in England. An MA program is 1 year instead of 2.
Oh, interesting.
It's intense.
Yeah.
It's really intense, but you can do it faster. And I went over there and studied, and it was, in the core group of students studying sort of naval history, maritime history, it was me, 44-year-old female, and 5 20-something-year-old guys. So that was interesting. I'm like, all right, I'm like the mom. Okay, fine, whatever.
And how did they take to you?
They actually took to me pretty well. I really enjoyed spending time with all of them. I mean, it was hard to get kind of social things going, but I would organize some stuff. We'd all go out and see a movie or go to the pub or whatever. So, we did some things, and that was nice. But, that part was a little hard. I was a little bit isolated over there. I didn't have any really close friends for that year. And being 5,000 miles away from home, even though I was able to keep up with people on Skype, it was pretty isolating and lonely, but, we did have some fun here and there, and I got to travel around the country a bit, sometimes for fun. And then for my research for my dissertation, I think I went to 8 different archives around the country. Okay. So that was cool to get to kind of go to Nottingham and, places like that. So
places we Americans have only heard about in stories.
Yes. And just so everyone knows, I did make the trip to Sherwood Forest, which is like an hour outside of Nottingham. And it is so not worth the trip. It's not what you picture at all. It's really like spindly little trees and just this little clump. And they have one giant oak tree that's propped up with wires and metal girders to keep it from falling, from keep the branches from falling, because it's like the only one they have. And then there are all these signs about this is an oak tree that is the kind of tree that Robin Hood might have hidden out in.
Oh my gosh.
It's really dumb. So, I did it, but
yeah. And
at least it didn't cost anything.
And that's not even his purported burial place, if I remember right.
Right. Yeah. I don't even know where that is. Yeah. There was nothing like that there. A couple statues of him, but
I'm trying to remember my Robin Hood stories now, but I can't remember where he was, but I remember he shot an arrow out the bedroom window and said, "Bury me there."
Oh.
But I can't remember exactly what town that was in. Oh, now I'm going to have to go look that up. So, okay. So you got to do some sightseeing in England. That's very cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
And so it's only a 1-year program. That must be amazingly intense it takes more than that to write a dissertation usually.
Right. Well, yeah. So it's a 3-term program. So it's a full year rather than like if you did it in 2 years here in the US, you'd have a regular kind of school year calendar where you'd get some of the summer off. This one went, September to September, basically. And so that final term is just, you're doing nothing but writing your dissertation, doing whatever you need to do for that. But the first 2 terms, you only have 2 classes per term, which sounds really easy. I had a friend who had recently done her dissertation in English literature here in the US. And she was like, you only have 2 classes? That's not fair, and you only have to write 2 papers each class. I had to write a bunch. And I said, okay, but how many words was your first paper? She said it was like 800 words and it went up to, 3,000 or something. And I said, okay, well, my first paper is 3,000 and the second is 5,000. And I, have never written a paper this long before. So this is hard. Don't act like this is easy.
Right.
So yeah, and doing presentations in the class and things, of course, on various things, that was a whole different ball game for me. And I'd been out of school for so long. I went back to a local community college and took some courses just to make sure I could handle school still.
Okay, yeah.
But still, that's not even close to going for a graduate degree.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
They're very different. So yeah, it was really intense, and I had to really work hard to be able to keep up, with all these young students who are fresh off of their bachelor's degrees, which are done very differently in the UK than they are in the US. So just even my background was not quite what theirs was to prepare for this. So,
now,
but I got through it.
You were there because you had a personal interest in the subject and you were really doing it more for personal enrichment more than anything.
Yes.
What did those other 5 guys think they were going to get out of a master's in the Age of Sail?
I don't know. Actually, one of them has now just received his doctorate degree in archaeology.
Okay,
which is very impressive, Dr. Stone. I'm kind of jealous of that. But so he may, go on and teach, and I think that was a lot of it. A lot of them were like, "Well, I'll teach, whatever." And that's kind of it's part of what I pretended I was going to do. Yeah, I'll teach, or I'll work in a maritime museum. And, I kind of always knew deep down I wasn't going to do any of that. But hey, now I'm doing awesome podcast episodes, so I'm using it.
There you go. See, it all comes around.
Well, I approach education also not just from, if you get this degree, you need to work in that field, whatever. For me, I think higher education is the more important part of it is just learning to think in different and more advanced ways.
Certainly, yeah.
Because there's, even between having a bachelor's degree and a master's, there's been a massive shift in how I understand things. So that's what I think is more important. And a lot of people don't focus on that.
That's interesting. What is something that you think about differently now because of that?
Well, just, having trained as a historian, I think I have a better appreciation of how history works and how things happening now work, and and when we're kind of misusing history and things, and people are putting out all this information, it's like, well, don't just blindly believe what you're looking at. Right. Because it's actually really easy to research this stuff. Everything's right out there for you, and people don't take the time to do it. Whereas I'm now like, oh yeah, research is easy. I'm gonna check this out, and oh yeah, look, that's totally fake. So,
right.
And also just then being able to take a longer term look at things and say, look, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, we've always been okay. We're going to be okay. Just it's going to be rough for a while and then we'll be all right. So let's just work toward that.
That probably gives you a more sense of calm than other people have about everything.
Most of the time, not always, right. But we all get caught up in it.
Sure,
sometimes, right? But I try to use that to stay calm. Yes.
So, what was your dissertation about specifically?
It was the actual title of it is "Them Were the Chaps As Played Howitt the Fleet, Quota Men in the British Royal Navy, 1795 to 1797."
Okay, quota men, was it?
Yes.
So, okay, what does that mean?
The quota men were as the Royal Navy was gearing up and bringing ships online to fight the French Revolutionary War and later the Napoleonic War. They needed to man the ships, and between the men they already had in the Navy and the men who were in the merchant service, who they could pilfer off of that, there weren't enough men to fully man the ships. So they needed more. So what they did was Parliament in 1795 and 1796, each year they enacted a Quota Act, which required that each county in England and Scotland, not Wales for some reason, but England and Scotland and Northern Ireland, that they then would have to supply a certain number of men, kind of depending on how big a county it was. They'd get whatever their quota was. And so, and they had to, the idea was to get volunteers to come into the Navy. There were people who didn't have any sailing experience, but they'd be trained up once they got on board. And, that way they could fill their full complements on each ship. So their reputation through history has been pretty bad. A lot of historians have written about how these guys were responsible for these big naval mutinies that happened in 1797 at Spithead and the Nore. And, really fomented discontent throughout the fleet. And that they were, enrolled by all these seditious societies and were these horrible people. And that each of the counties just emptied out their jails and sent these guys in and sent their vagrants in through this and everything. So they were really horrible, awful men, which is kind of that quote that I put at the start of my title. Them Were the Chaps As Played Howitt the Fleet. It's from this longer quote from a book written in the 1800s, giving this really colorful quote from it says it's from a quote sailor, like no name, no origin of this, it's just from a sailor who told this author this great quote, who I'm like, the guy probably wouldn't still have been alive at that time, whatever, if he'd actually been there with these quota men, whatever, fine. So basically that one quote is what everybody else has taken this reputation from. And it's, as far as I can tell, that quote's a complete fabrication. Okay. So, there's never been anything to back it up.
If they don't even try to attribute it to somebody.
Right. Yeah. If that's all you can say is a sailor, come on. So I'm like, why has everybody been believing this so blindly? I don't get that. So what I did was, that's why I went out to all these different parts of the country, out to all of these different archives, because those were the places that still had at least some of their enrollment records from those quota acts, because they had to write down, the guy's name, his occupation, his age, things like that. So I was able to go out and look and kind of create a database of who these guys were. And what I discovered is they were from the typical trades of each area. The things that have been said, like, okay, all the seditious societies, they enrolled school teachers and printers and all the people who could spread information to others. And like, well, so I said there really weren't that many of those people enrolled.
Right.
And then I used, there was a guy, I should have looked up his name and I don't have it right in front of me. Anyway, he had just done a PhD dissertation that he gave me access to, where he talked about men on the vessels and like how each of them had come into the service. So he had all these percentages and everything, and using his information plus what I saw, I was able to come up with more narrow looks at, how many of these men from what were said to be seditious backgrounds would have been on each individual vessel, and it was like less than one.
Okay.
So each ship might have had one of these guys, maybe two if they were really lucky. But there was no way they could have created all this discontent among a crew of 800, 1,000 men.
Sure.
So there's just no truth to this story that we've been told about these quota men. So
that's interesting. So originally it started as sort of draft / Hunger Games, right? Because they weren't having to send everybody. They were just picking their few guys, and they were picking somebody with some skills and things like that. But that's that's interesting that there wouldn't have been number wise you couldn't have had that many guys on there too. And if they did, they should have been public speakers.
Right, exactly. and most of the guys were actually volunteers, so they weren't even assigning. It wasn't even a draft. It was, hey, we need you, and there was enough. There were problems with the harvest in 1795, so a lot of the general laborers didn't have work. So, of course, they would have taken this on. There's pay, there's regular meals. It was an attractive offer, so they volunteered. And then I did discover, like, all this talk about vagrants and criminals. I looked into those as well. I looked at court records everywhere, and there was absolutely no evidence that there were any jail clearances, but then there was another author who said, criminals were never allowed in the Royal Navy. And I proved that wrong because I actually found a case. I saw what he had referenced, and I looked at that, and then what that had referenced and what the person he referenced had written about didn't exist. This order that they weren't to enroll criminals, that was not in the order that he referenced. So, but there were criminals enrolled, just not through these acts and not in huge numbers. And then there was a separate Vagrant Act in 1795 that was designed to enroll vagrants into the Royal Navy. So some came in through that. That was really low numbers as well. But so any vagrants that came in weren't through the Quota Acts. They were through this separate Vagrant Act. So you can't blame the Quota Acts for them. And again, there were so few of them, they didn't make any kind of impact.
That's interesting. One of the prevailing stories about the origin of the Golden Age pirates is that there was bad treatment of them on the military ships and the merchant ships. What do you know about that type of stuff?
Well, I mean, and that's been a reputation just in general of the Royal Navy. You have this rum sodomy and the lash thing. One guy writes a book and everybody goes, yeah, that was it. Well, no. So as we're learning, not every book is right. So, were there Royal Navy captains who mistreated their crews? Absolutely, there were. They weren't high in number, but they were out there. But there were methods for those crews to redress those issues, and they could bring their concerns to the Admiralty. And often the Admiralty would act on that. They'd switch out their captain, or they would, try to work with them to make it better. And so, yes, there were circumstances of horrible punishments, unfair punishments, but they weren't widespread because it was in a captain's interest to treat his crew as well as he could to maintain their loyalty and maintain their ability to work together in time of action. Because if your crew was unhappy, you weren't going to be an effective ship. And that doesn't do anything good for the captain, So, but some of the punishments of the era, whether you were on a naval vessel or you were on a pirate vessel, some of the punishments are, looking at them from our modern viewpoint, they're barbaric. And we think, oh, look, it was so terrible for them. But those were common punishments that were being meted out by the courts as well. So, things like pressing and quartering and doing horrible, awful things, that today we're like, oh, wow, no. But they were common then. So even though they look quite brutal on these vessels, they were using the same punishments that were being used on shore by the official courts.
Interesting.
So, you can't really look at it from our modern perspective. You have to look at it from their contemporary perspective.
Yeah, of course. And so since you have delved in depth into sort of both sides of the pirate thing and the military part of that, where do you think some of the guys that came out of the British military and did become pirates, why do you think that happened?
Well, I think some of it probably there probably was a general discontent, just like I didn't like my job. Some of them didn't like theirs. One of the big things in those naval mutinies that happened, even though the quota men weren't responsible for it. And this is the thing that that Parliament kept ignoring and everybody kept ignoring is what they were asking for. Their primary request was a raise in pay, because the Royal Navy sailors' pay for the average able seaman hadn't been increased in 150 years.
Oh, like comedians.
Right. So, there was, so they had no cost of living increases. So this was, of course, they were upset about this. I would have been too, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a general discontent in that through the years. And yeah, some people just, sometimes you just don't take to authority. You don't want that. You're like, okay, look, I keep doing what they want and I'm not making any money and I can't provide for myself or for my family. So I'm going to take a shot at doing this other thing that, even though it's illegal, I have maybe a better chance of making some prize money than I have in this naval vessel or in this merchant vessel. So I'm going to take a shot, a short life, but a merry one, as they say.
Right.
So, I mean, I can understand, and I'm sure there were a million reasons for it, and you just, discontent would probably have been the biggest one of, hey, I'm tired of this.
Yeah.
Of having to do what this captain says. I want to, and there were times where maybe you were on a naval vessel and you saw an enemy vessel that you wanted to go and take, the whole crew wanted to go and take, but because of whatever mission you were on, it wasn't, they couldn't, the captain said, no, we can't do it, because it's going to take us too far out of our mission. And so that would be discontenting for the crew, because, hey, that's prize money.
Sure, yeah.
We want that. So, you maybe go someplace where you can make those decisions and you can say, look, we're all going to vote. Yeah, we all want to go after that ship, so let's do it.
Right.
As opposed to having that dictator in charge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now I have a wonderful picture in my head of a mutiny in the Disney credit card offices.
I talked about it from time to time.
So when there were British pirates out plundering Spanish ships, do you have any thoughts about what the British military thought about that? Or did they consider them friend or foe at that point?
Well, I mean, they were doing a service by taking out some of those ships, but they were not doing it officially. Obviously, unless they were a privateer, in which case they were doing it officially. Right. But the straight up pirates, yeah, that's great, but it wasn't like the crown was getting any of the benefit of selling off whatever their cargo was or any of that. So yeah, I mean, that's illegal, and I don't think that they favored it, though at the same time there may have been circumstances where it did help them out a little bit. But I don't think they really looked at it as a favor of any kind. But maybe here and there.
All right. Do you have any particular favorite historical figures from that time period that you were? It's funny. One of the questions I vowed I was never going to ask on this show is, "Who's your favorite pirate?" And I did that. I did that like 2 weeks ago to somebody.
How can you not do that? Come on.
But
so I have a favorite.
Who was your favorite historical figure that you encountered during that time?
Well, I mean, I have a favorite pirate and I have a favorite Royal Navy admiral. So, so the pirate, of course, is Blackbeard. I mean, how can you go with anyone else, really? He's colorful, and he's a guy who, to me, he understood how to put on the show. So he knew how to frighten people so much that they wouldn't bother fighting, because that wasn't in anybody's interest to have an actual battle, And I just love that he was so good at that and so theatrical in what he did, not just with other vessels, but with his own crew. Was he crazy? Maybe a little, yeah. But there were others who were far worse than him in that area. But yeah, I mean, how can you not just love Blackbeard? Come on. He's awesome. Criminal, a terrible person, but awesome.
So I imagine you've run across Bayless Brooks' book about him, and maybe Sam Marquis's stuff and things like that.
Oh, I don't know. Probably.
Okay.
Like I say, I've read so many books, I couldn't even tell you what I've read.
All right. I can identify.
I have like shelves and shelves full of these things. I was looking, in fact, for a particular book yesterday, and I'm like, I don't know where it is. I can't find it. I have so many shelves and boxes, and I don't know. And then my favorite of the Royal Navy captains, admirals is Thomas Cochrane, who was a Scottish Captain. Anybody who's read Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander series about Jack Aubrey, all of the biggest and kind of most unbelievable things that happened to Jack came straight out of Cochrane's life. Like there's a big thing where he's caught up in this stock market scheme and he gets kicked out of the Royal Navy for it and ends up going to Chile and overseeing their Navy. All of that is straight out of Cochrane's life. It actually happened. And it's kind of crazy, but also he's cantankerous. He doesn't like authority. He hates it when people tell him how to approach, like, okay, we're going to send you off in charge of this small fleet and have you do X, Y, Z. And he's like, no, but that's not how it should be done. I've got this better plan. And they try to tell him, no, stick to our plan. And he never would. And he'd go out and do his thing and be successful and deal with the consequences, which what could they do? Because he was successful, right? So, and he would just flat out ignore, like when he was a captain, he would sometimes just ignore his admiral's orders. His admiral's sitting right there in his own vessel, right in front of him. And he's like, no. So he would do what he wanted. So I enjoy that about him. I think he'd be a difficult person to get along with, but I would adore him. So prickly as anything, but geniuses are, right? So
sounds pretty intriguing. That's great. So so tell me about your podcast a little bit. Movies Made Me.
Yes, I started it 3 years ago. I just celebrated my third anniversary. Yay. And it's a show, like I say, it came out of my own experience with movies, of being influenced by them. Obviously, Pirates was a really big influence, and most people don't have one quite that large, but I have a guest on. It's every 2 weeks, and we talk about the 5 movies and 3 other things, anything they want to choose, that have influenced them to be who they are. So it's just a very different way of looking at film than what anybody else is really doing out there right now. And I've had all kinds of people on the show, everybody from Clancy Brown, who, everybody knows from Highlander and SpongeBob SquarePants, and I had a local coffee shop waitress on, because everybody has a story like this, right? Yeah. So, and it's been really fascinating to hear. And in the, 79 episodes I have up so far, we've had more than 300 different movies that have been chosen as influential. So it's been really interesting to hear what the movies are and how they've affected people and, made them think differently, or like with me, given them a fear or made them want to pursue a career or whatever it is.
Sure. So, yeah. What have been some of the most common ones, the ones that come up a lot?
Well, the number one most influential movie is the original Star Wars, of course.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
The age range of people I end up talking to. I've had some really young people on, but most of the people are, about my age. So we were all kids when Star Wars came out, and that was kind of a big moment for a lot of people. Sure. So, Jaws was a big one. Most of the people ended up with a fear, like I did, although one person, it made him want to go into making movies and making entertainment, which is, he does create entertainment now. So it's been kind of neat to see some of those ones that multiple people name, but how differently it can affect each of those people.
Right. Yeah, certainly. How often do you get somebody on who throws up a movie that like you've never even heard of?
Oh, that happens pretty regularly. Like people are always kind of surprised, like, you've never seen that? Some of them are even pretty common movies that I just haven't seen for whatever. And I'm like, look, I know I'm doing a film podcast, but that doesn't mean I've seen everything.
Yeah, right. Who's got time? Yeah.
That's why people sometimes say, oh, do you want me to give you my list ahead of time? Like I'm going to watch all of them. I'm like, no, I don't have time for that. We'll make it a surprise for me, just like it is for the listeners.
There you go. That's cool. Now I have to go watch Eddie and the Cruisers again, because that's one of my big ones. Yeah.
All right. I'll send you the official invite, and we'll get it put together, because I would love to hear your movies.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. The website for your podcast is mmmpodcast.com, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay, great. So I'll get that in the show notes. Do you have another website for yourself, or any place where people can keep up with what you're doing online?
Not really. No. Well, I do have a motorsport website, but it's so out of date. So we won't talk about that one. That was a whole nother lifetime. I've had many chapters. You can follow me on Twitter at SpeedwayCJ. Also, the show is on Twitter at Movies Made Me Pod. So, follow both of us there, and Instagram at SpeedwayCJ and at Movies Made Me.
Okay.
And then Facebook, the show's on there at Movies Made Me Pod.
Okay.
I didn't plan that very well at the start. Movies Made Me Pod, Movies Made Me, somebody already had it some places. Should have thought longer on that.
I know. Mine are all over the place, too. Yeah, it was 3 years ago. I was like, I should get some continuity going here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Cheryl, this has been super fun. I'm glad we got a chance to do this.
Me too. It's been a delight. And yeah, I even though I study the Royal Navy, I do love pirates still. So I want to make that clear.
Nice.
I'm not, I'm not anti-pirate by any means.
Excellent. Very good. Well, I hope we can talk again soon. This has been great.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. There it is, friends. That is my interview with Cheryl Jones. You can find out more about her show. Go to mmmpodcast.com to check out Movies Made Me. And like I said, you can hear me on her show coming up in September. You'll hear about it. I'll make sure you hear about it because that's what we do. We make sure you hear about things and find out cool stuff. We're sponsored today, of course, by Pirate Radio of the Treasure Coast, WKKC-DB, playing the best music of today's hits and yesterday's classics, and Pirate Radio Talk, playing the best pirate shows, including Under the Crossbones, 24/7, commercial-free. If you are listening on Pirate Radio right now, thank you for listening. I much appreciate it, and you're a good person. If you're not listening to us on Pirate Radio, go check them out. PirateRadioTheTreasureCoast.com, that's the music station, or Pirate Radio TC is the talk station. And don't forget to download their apps. That's the Pirate Radio WKKC-DB for the music station, and Pirate Radio Talk is the talk station app, coming to you from iTreasure Radio, the very best digital media from independently owned stations at iTreasureRadio.com. And yes, I will be doing an interview with the owners of Pirate Radio very, very soon. That's coming up too. And let's see, what else we got here? We got an ebook for you. Alexander Exquemelin's Pirates of Panama, or Buccaneers of America, originally published in 1678. Alexander Exquemelin was a doctor who ended up on pirate ships and wrote about his adventures and his experiences. It's very cool, and I got a free, cool little ebook version of it for you. Go to underthecrossbones.com, click on the free ebook link, and you can grab it right there, and it will be all good. That is our show for today, friends. Thank you very much for tuning in, as always. Again, if you want to find out more about Cheryl Jones and what she's up to, go to mmmpodcast.com to check out the Movies Made Me podcast. We have mucho really cool stuff coming up. If you look at the upcoming episodes list on underthecrossbones.com, you will see that there's only a few listed there. I've gotten a little bit behind, but I have a whole bunch on the calendar that'll be recorded in the next couple of weeks that are going to be super cool. And then, of course, at the Pirate Invasion in Long Beach, I'm going to be stockpiling awesome pirate interviews while I'm there as well. So lots of great stuff coming up. Next week, we're going to hear from Dave Burgess of Teach Like a Pirate. So if you're into any sort of educational reenactment or historical education or any of that kind of stuff, you're really going to enjoy that episode. Dave has some very cool teaching ideas that he writes and talks about. The following week, Daniel Redmond and Steve Bush from the Ahoy There podcast, which is an improvised comedy podcast about pirates. It's a story podcast. Very funny. You'll dig that. We're going to hear from those guys. And then Rich Manick of Captain Festus McBoyle's Travel and Variety Show, all the way from New Zealand. We finally managed to get that one happening, and he is a super cool, interesting dude as well. So lots of great stuff coming up. Tell your friends, if they're not listening yet, go grab their phone and open their podcast app and subscribe them to Under the Crossbones so that just like you, they will get it every Tuesday morning when it comes out. And again, all the show notes, underthecrossbones.com/138, and I will see you next week. Thanks.